Hey, John, I want to thank you again for taking time on your holiday weekend. As you can see
Yeah, yeah.
behind me, we brought the sun down with this interview, so that's the first
Yep.
also. But thanks again, and everybody, thanks for tuning in. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Trade Secrets by Tripletote. I want to thank you guys for tuning in with us. I got a very special guest today. His name is John FIorello, and he's a good friend of mine. But more importantly than that, he's offered to take time out his busy schedule outside of work hours to meet with me tonight to get this interview done. So I really appreciate it. John, how's it
Yeah,
going?
absolutely. Oh, it's going great. It's been a beautiful Memorial Day. Got a chance to be with some friends. I don't know if you can hear some firecrackers going out there. The neighborhood is excited, even though they're social distancing.
I know,
They're
right?
still
Everybody
out
likes the
fireworks.
firecrackers 6 feet apart.
Yeah. How about yourself? It's been a good weekend?
Yeah, it's been a real good weekend, man. Got a lot of chance to relax in the house most of the time, but watching movies, hanging out with the family is the best.
Awesome. Very cool.
Now, I got you on the show because you invented a product different from any of my guests in the past. And also, I know your journey has been very interesting, so I know my guests will benefit my viewers. Tell the crowd what what RecordMe is and how you came up with the idea.
All right. Well, most simply, RecordMe is the world's first globally distributed recording studio. It's a combination of a hardware device and a service paired together that allows you to get studio recordings of live events anywhere in the world, but at a fraction of the price of a traditional studio. We started years and years ago. It's in the startup world. It's been a long time. It started with a pretty simple question, and that was looking at a whole bunch of parents trying to get a clip of their children performing in a school recital. You know, the music wasn't great. They were all sitting in like a gym auditorium, gymnasium that just, you know, sounded terrible. Everybody was trying to use their iPhones to get a recording that was poor, was far away, and everybody was trying to do it. And I was bummed, you know, my daughter was starting to do music, and I knew that I wanted to be able to get a recording of her performing, but not like that. And so I asked myself and a couple of friends, I said, is there a way that we could do this differently? Uh, but the key was the school couldn't afford to pay us to bring the studio out to record. Um, so we had to figure out a way that we could offer basically a recording studio service that didn't cost anything up front and didn't cost us and our studio money to just go out, spend, and give away, you know, basically a free service. And so we said, well, there was like some sort of hardware solution we could use where, you know, we could keep the people at the studio itself, but still get the streams and mix and master and make them sound good. That was really cool. So we looked around for a while and nothing existed. And so we said, well, we might be able to do this. So we just started adding equipment to a box and making it smaller and spending time, you know, revisioning. And eventually out of that came the RecordMe box.
That's awesome. So before you actually invented the box, you owned a studio or you were an engineer at a studio?
Yeah, my wife and I owned a production company, and we did remote recording, and we did recording in small studios that we had, either home studios or at remote locations. You know, I have a background in engineering, audio and music, and so does my wife. So we've been working on that type of stuff for a while. So it was in our wheelhouse, but it was also something that I enjoyed doing, which was kind of coming up with ideas from scratch and then trying to make them work. I didn't realize that I was good at that at the time. Uh, but as I started doing it, I found it was the type of time that you would spend and you'd lose track of time because you were enjoying the creative process and the designing process. And it just met really well with the skills that I had. And so it was, you know, it was like it just kept building momentum until all of a sudden there wasn't enough time in the day. And, you know, I was working, you know, my day job. I was doing this, you know, after my day job until 10 o'clock at night, then going home and then getting up the next morning doing the same thing. And eventually said, you know what, we think there's a business here. And if we're going to grow it, we have to stop working on our day job and actually focus on this.
That's awesome. I love the way you did what a lot of entrepreneurs are doing to make things simple and not such a big risk. You kept your full time while you did your passion on a part time, and then grew it so that you could afford to do it. on a more consistent basis, and that's awesome. So when you developed the first RecordMe box, who was the first client you got to use it in the way it was intended to be used?
So even before it was in its full-blown version that it is now, we had to start with an MVP. It's important for startups to at least create something just to see if there's any demand, if anybody even wants it. And usually you end up connecting with friends, family, local resources that you have. In this case, we had a school teacher. When I say we, I mean me and some of the folks that worked in a production company. We had gone to public high school in Torrington, and the teacher that was there teaching music was the one that we had. And so we went and we introduced ourselves and said, hey, it's been like, 8 or 10 years. And he's like, oh, I remember you guys. And we chatted for a little while. And we said, listen, we want to try and help you as the music faculty make some money for your students through their performances. We won't charge anything up front, and it's a big test. And worst case scenario, it doesn't cost anything, and the failure is not bad. And we promise we won't charge anybody anything, but we think we could sell recordings for you. Would you be willing to give us a try? And he said, sure, try it out. So Torrington High School was the first ones. And we learned, of course, a ton, not only about the hardware, but the process of licensing and dealing with parents and making physical sales. And it was insane. But once they used it once, they wanted to use it again. And then almost every school in the school system wanted to use it because it was, basically found money, and all the music departments are strapped for cash. So we ended up doing a bunch of concerts for a bunch of the different schools, like all the schools in Torrington get together and for their the real young kids, like we're talking I don't know, 2nd grade to 5th grade. It's a cacophony of noise, but they really like it, and the parents, of course, are all excited. So we did a few of those too.
That's pretty awesome. Now let me ask, in this new day of streaming, SoundCloud, where musicians are able to put their own work out without need of a record label, record company, how does your device help these new entrepreneurs, these new artists? How does it help them make more inroads with the audience they're building and the music they're making?
Yeah, man, that's a loaded question. There's so many different dynamics going on, and we don't have all the answers. We developed a product that currently is 100% useless in a market where there's a pandemic and all the live venues closed. So you have to take everything I say with a grain of salt. But we believe that this is the best thing for independent musicians. Musicians, old school, would raise money to go into the studio, spend a lot of money to record a CD, and then they would tour to support paying off that CD. But most independent musicians know what it feels like to have a box of old CDs or cassette tapes sitting in a closet because they couldn't move the inventory, and their friends and family were buying it, but they'd have to press 1,000 CDs to make it cost effective. So what they always aspired to was getting signed to a record label, and the transition between the two is incredibly difficult. It takes a ton of momentum, it takes a ton of fans, and you kind of have to use those fans to grow more fans. But then you make this transition where all of a sudden you have to give away the rights to the stuff that you create in order for the label to own them and then sell you, and just sort of like in the startup world, treat you like a startup, bet some money on you and then cut you loose as soon as you don't make back your money because they invested in 10 bands and hopefully one band makes up for the 9 failures. And we just think there's a better way to do that, and that's through the musicians owning their own content and connecting directly to their fans. The difficulty is, how do you pay for that? And if you're a musician and only has 100 or 200 fans, back before Patreon existed, I mean, maybe Kickstarter had such a high failure rate for musicians. Less than half of the campaigns wouldn't even get funded. It was tough. But if you had a system where you could connect directly with your fans and sell recordings as you go for events in advance, and low cost of entry, so you didn't have to come up with the money up front, that's pretty special. And so that's what we developed, and then it sort of morphed from there to also be able to allow venues that had smaller bands with smaller followings be able to make more money on those live shows. So the venue might be coming up with $500 for the band to play, but the band could actually make maybe another $500 selling recordings of that live show without it costing the venue any more money.
That's pretty awesome. On-demand recording of a live show, usually those types of opportunities were just say for if a very popular band wanted to release a concert album of their greatest hits, that was the only way you could justify the spend because you knew the fans would buy it. But now
Yeah.
you've made it so that new artists who are even developing their fan base, like you say, a couple hundred people, can partake in the same type of thing where on SoundCloud, on YouTube, they can redistribute their content and get paid for the venue where they were actually performing the content, but they can get paid for their content after they even do the live show. So that's really, really helpful to those guys out there in the field.
Yeah, especially because, you know, when Live Nation would do this with, you know, a mega band, it made sense because you had, you know, 30, 40, 50,000 people coming to a stadium, and the metrics made sense for them to have $1 million tour bus and 3 engineers and all the equipment and the connections and the testing that it took to basically bring a studio with them wherever they went. And that's great, but small artists don't have that. And the competitive advantage that the box has given us is to be able to provide just the most necessary components to get what we say is 95% of quality of actually being inside of a recording studio, but just at a fraction of the price. Where eventually, if they can pre-sell 30 recordings of the event, it won't cost them anything.
Wow, that's pretty awesome. So right now, what are you guys working on technology wise to make the RecordMe enhance it or make it a little bit more compatible? What type of features are you guys adding to the box?
Well, I can't tell you too much about specific features, but I can tell you that licensing changes a lot when you shift from just an audio recording to anything else. And as you've mentioned, as streaming has become more popular and through this pandemic, lockdown, whatever you want to call it, um, people have been consuming more streaming and obviously lost all their live venue experience. Um, we're seeing, you know, folks like what was it? Fortnite had that, you know, mega concert, you know, totally
Hmm.
virtual. Um, Life changes once you want to start adding some sort of motion and video. So, in addition to um, you know, issues with hardware, just trying to get it from China and the dynamics of purchasing things that aren't being made in as high of a quantity is a bit of a struggle. So we're changing some of the box there. We're looking at how we can use the hardware that we have and sort of morph into a post-COVID world where maybe the last things to open up are live venues, you know?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so if you got a do-it-yourself at home kit, not just for the live anywhere, these bands could still release their audio and the quality's there, and technology's there to mend it to anything they like to post to Instagram, SoundCloud, YouTube. That's
Yeah.
that's dope. That's great. That's
You
great.
know, we tell musicians, we say, listen, if you're a super creative type, like that doesn't always mean that you're also a super analytical type that does a good job doing a mix down. So why don't you worry about creating your music, doing the craft that you love, and let other people like us, the engineers, worry about making you sound good. You know, and if you can get just a good quality input, just do that and then send it to us, and we'll do the work. And we'll make
What
it
were you
sound awesome.
guys able through your research and your re-engineering over and over again? I know you went through a few iterations. What were you guys able to? What was the price range you were at least able to get the box down to for somebody?
So that was a big transition for us, and this you know, shout out to Liz Roberts, who was running VVM at the time, help us kind of work through this. The problem was that the hardware that we use, it's high end, it's low quantity, aka, you know, we're not mass producing it, so the costs are extremely high. And the box, you know, if we were to sell it outright, we would sell it for about $6,000. It'll do up to 64 channels of bidirectional audio and built-in video and stuff like that. So that's sort of like the sweet spot, but that's enormously expensive for a band that, you know, might not even be able to go in a studio and drop $6,000 on an album. So what we had to do is we had to change the value proposition and how we actually met our customer base. And so what we did was we said, we'll take the money off the pre-sales, and as long as you can get 30 recordings pre-sold, and by the way, we do this while paying the artist for every recording that they sell, so they make a percentage of each sale. We would let them use the equipment without having to buy the equipment. So it's a bit like a leasing program in a sense that when the show that they have comes up, as long as we hit the pre-sales, we provide the hardware. They do the show, we get the hardware back. That did cause a significant issue when we started building these custom-built boxes across the country. we we have a box. I don't want to talk down about UBS. I know they're a GAN partner, but it, let's just say it looked like it dropped off the back of an airplane. by the time I got to the plants in California.
Jesus.
Yeah, it was not great. So that also changed how we had to deliver. So then we started focusing on the Northeast, um, and being able to deliver the boxes. Ultimately, the goal is to be able to have enough boxes distributed around the country that we can have a partner go in, especially because, when we think about artists and musicians, we think about young musicians or early musicians. We tend to think about people like us, but there's a huge amount of musicians that aren't like us at all. They might be, retired, semi-retired. They might, you know, um, have like a church choir that they sing in, and like the technological knowledge could be like zero or like maybe even negative, like the things they tend to break. So having somebody that can go in there and actually plug it in for them, set up the mics for them, and get it in the right spot could be really helpful. So we'd like to be able to add, a few people regionally that can go out and deploy some boxes, and then it'll cut down on the problems that we have, shipping them all over the country. We had a mentor who's John, who would come to VVM, and he worked previously with a company that built physical firewalls, and they had a rule that they would not ship a one rack unit firewall across the country more than, I don't know, 6 times, because the noise, vibration, the harshness just riding through a UPS truck
Mm.
just destroys electronic components. And I had no idea until it started happening to us.
Oh, geez. Oh, geez. Now, when it comes to the future, what are you guys looking forward to in the next, 24 to 48 months? What things are you looking forward to, and what things are you working on?
Well, as you know, being in a startup is a roller coaster of ups and downs.
Oh, yeah.
It's an incredible challenge, and and your outlook a lot of times depends on where you are at that moment, and you kind of have to force yourself to say, no, hold on, things are not as good or as bleak as they look at the very moment that we're in. But you also have to have a thought out roadmap that can pivot very quickly. So what we're trying to do right now is reassess before we make a push out to the world with some sort of answer to the lockdown scenario that we're in. And it's funny. I read a ton of industry blogs and emails that are coming out from these think tanks all over the world, really, that are trying to understand what's happening and where things going. Prior to this, we were having this, basically the 2 or 3 major companies that own most of the venues just buying up venues left and right. AEG, Live Nation, just saying, "Oh, that stadium's ours. So that live venue's ours," and you had this sort of consolidation of venues. When they're all not working, what do you do? So
Mm.
there's going to be a shakeup. I don't know exactly where we'll end up with that, and a lot of that, matters what happens, with the virus as we start coming out of lockdown. A return to normal would be a lot easier, but I don't necessarily know that's likely. So we're sitting back, we're reading, we're trying to understand what artists are trying to do, what venues are thinking about doing. There's got to be a solution that takes the industry in a place that's better. And when I say better, I mean better for the musicians and the creators themselves.
Hmm.
Um, you know, the further you go in the music industry, the skeevier it is.
That's right. That's right.
which is not great for your average person. Now, I understand, like, some musicians, they're searching for that, and they want that stardom and the Bentleys. But most musicians that just love music and love creating don't need that. As long as you could pay their bills for them, if they could do this full time, that would be it. And they don't need to make millions and millions of dollars to be able to continue to create and have a real life connection with their fans. And that's what we want to focus on. I I saw something on, was it Instagram or Twitter? One rap artist was complaining because they said that Billboard purchased something like 35,000 physical CDs to bump them up on the charts for their own Billboard charts, and they're going back and forth and arguing, or whatever. Like, who needs that nonsense? Why don't you just get up in your attic and go write a song and deliver it to your, 100 best fans, and let them, pay you something for it, and you make a living doing music. You don't have to worry about all that stuff.
Yeah, yeah. It's unfortunate that, like you said, the further you get away from the artist, the more shaky and you know the industry gets. But I think this day and time, again, with platforms like YouTube, SoundCloud, Instagram, artists are gaining their independence slowly. It's a slow tide, but it's turning And again, inventors like you giving them access to inexpensive equipment, especially based upon just a lease, a lease fee instead of having to even buy it, which is a capital expense, which is always bad for a startup, right? So you're giving
Oh
them
yeah.
a way in where they can get this equipment at a fraction of the cost for their own particular use, and they can gradually build up their momentum, build up their following, and they can make money instead of just starting in debt. You know what I mean? And I think that's what you're doing good. You're making sure these guys don't have to start out in debt to have a quality product.
Well, let me just say, if there's any musicians watching right now, listen, own your own content. As you know, you're going to have to make your money in a ton of different places. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. Don't just trust that YouTube's going to keep you on forever, or you're going to have to find some other video platform. Don't just think that if I can get my songs on Spotify, I'll be good, and because that might not last. I mean, technology changes and the platforms we're on change,
That's right.
but the content that you create is yours until you sell it or give it away. So don't do that.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Hey, John, I want to thank you again for taking time on your holiday weekend. As you can see
Yeah.
behind me, we brought the sun down with this interview, so that's the first
Yep.
also. But thanks again, and everybody, thanks for tuning in. And John, let people know where they can connect with you, what platforms or what your website is, so they can get in
Yep.
contact with you.
Well, hit us up at recordme.co, recordme.co. We're at Twitter and Instagram and Facebook at recordmeco. You can always shoot me an email, john at recordme.co. Antwaine, it's been fantastic getting to see your face again. I appreciate your hustle. It is inspiring. I love
Thank
seeing
you.
your videos show up on my feeds. Thank you very much for doing what you're doing.
All right, thanks, John. Hey, guys, thank you for tuning in to this episode of Trade Secrets by Tripletote. We'll do our best to keep bringing you good episodes and great guests like John here. Thank you so much.